Hi, I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with Dino Dai Zovi, who's the founder, co-founder, and CTO of Capsule8 here in New York City.
Hey, thank you.
How you doing, man?
Great. How about you?
How is everything going?
It's good. It's good. It's busy, but in a good way.
Busy time to be doing cybersecurity, right?
I know. Cybersecurity keeps getting busier and more important. So it's a good drive to make sure we're doing the right thing.
How many years have you been at this?
I've been working in cybersecurity for about pushing 20 years.
That's not something.
Like through college, full-time, about 15 plus years.
What attracted you to it? Was it hacking? Was it the technology? Was it an inspiring mentor? What kind of?
Kind of a mix. You know, I always liked technology. I was attached to a computer since I could barely speak.
Yeah.
But what really captured my attention with security was like a puzzle. Mm-hmm. And the sort of the challenge nature. It's like it's adversarial. So it's not just getting something to work. It's basically figuring out how something works better than someone else. Mm-hmm. And so both attack and defense are all based on being better at computers than the other side. And so figuring out it, like all attacks, I see them as just solving a puzzle. Mm. You know, they're this non-intuitive way of how something operates, and you figure out a way to kind of get in. Or you can apply the same to defense. Like there are insights that you can apply that are based on kind of a deeper understanding of the technology that can provide really effective defense. And that's just what keeps me going every single day, is these puzzles and these intellectual challenges.
Do you remember what your first computer was?
Oh, of course.
What was it?
My first computer that was truly mine was a 486DX.
So your parents have one?
Yeah, well, it was my father's computer, and I broke it enough times that he realized the easiest solution to the problem was to get a new computer for himself and just give me my own.
So what did you buy? What did you get?
It was a 486DX.
46?
Yeah, it was a hand-me-down.
Yeah.
You know, but I wanted to run actually Linux, and I broke his computer the first time by installing an ancient version of Slackware on it, and overwrote the master boot record to install Lilo, the Linux bootloader, and it wouldn't boot, so I had to fix it. And then he just, a couple months later, just gave me the computer, and that's where I learned everything.
Was there an ISP that gave you a shell account with that Linux box? Who'd you have?
So at that time, I was dialing up mostly through bulletin boards, but my internet was through the school district in Albuquerque.
Oh, okay.
So my mother was a teacher, and I was a library aide, I think in 7th grade, and I heard the librarian dial up to the internet. I heard the modem tone, and I'm like, oh, what's that? And I saw this menu system, and I asked her, like, hey, what bulletin board is that? She's like, no, this is not a bulletin board, this is the internet. I'm like, I've heard of that. Wait, how do I get on the internet? And she's like, well, it's a thing called the VAX, and the school district owns it, and this is 1992. And she's like,
VAX 11780 or something, a VMS.
I have no idea what hardware model it was.
Yeah.
But she said, anyone has this? I was like, who can get access to it? She's like, well, anyone that works for the school district. So I went home and I told my mother, I'm like, there's a thing called the VAX. I want a phone number, a username and password. It's all I need. Awesome. And so from then on, I had access to the internet and had dial-up. And so that's where kind of I cut my teeth. And if you look hard enough, I think you can find posts that I posted on Usenet in like 93 or 94.
Really?
Yep. Mostly looking for how to play songs on guitar.
Really?
Yeah.
You a guitarist?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Been playing a long time.
Now, what did you work on through the 90s into the 2000s? Were you doing security work kind of in college and in the early days of working?
Yeah. So I had a tremendous opportunity in high school. So first I was running the Linux server at my high school, and I was taking like a programming class before school. Right. It was called Adventures in Supercomputing, but I was always more interested in Internet and Unix and C and these things. Right. So instead of doing Fortran, I was doing my own independent study, and they actually got hacked. And so I asked the teachers, like, oh, I can show you what happened. Like, can I see it? And can you log in as root? And looked around, and then all of a sudden it was my job to run the server.
Right.
And because of that, and also in Albuquerque, if you were a smart kid, knew something about computers, it was pretty easy to get an internship at San Diego National Labs. And so a lot of my friends did it, and that's what I did kind of through my senior year, high school and most of college.
Wow.
And was able to learn from some amazing people there about computers. Like my first mentor was basically a Unix graybeard without all the gray, and learned a lot from him. Yeah. Learned a lot on and I kept teaching myself security while I was working and going to school. and because at that time there really weren't a lot of security things to do, so I was doing Unix administration and teaching myself what I could on the side, and eventually made my way over I found out there was a very interesting group at Sandia called the Red Team. It was the IDART Red Team, and read about them in the newspaper. I was like, I want to do that, and was able to do some projects for them. And they were like, oh, you're smart. You should work for us. So got to learn a lot from them as well.
Those were your first pen testing engagements?
Yeah.
Anything of note that you remember working on, or hacking, or
nothing I'm having to say here.
There must be something. We're amongst friends. Nobody pay attention as we go in there. Must have been a lot of early network type things, right?
I guess the thing that I can say is there's an episode of PBS Frontline from 2000 on cyber war, and I'm off camera.
Really?
And talking about power systems and security. And the group I worked for, my boss, were featured in that. So.
Wow, that's kind of cool. I didn't know that. That's pretty good.
Yeah. So and that was more red teaming. That was like a kind of a broader security analysis. What I really enjoyed doing was, I was I would read code and find vulnerabilities, and so we'd have a long project.
In the 90s, it was probably C that you read?
Yeah, I mean,
and
C, Java. I mean, it was. One of the things I find interesting about how we teach computer science is we don't spend a lot of time reading code. And if you think about literature and other pursuits, we spend 9% of our time reading what others have done, 10% starting our own. And in computer science, we've always just thrown people straight into writing code and not studying the kind of well-written software. And
do you remember Knuth did the literate programmer?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a cool concept where the code is embedded in a narrative.
Exactly. Instead of comments being an addition to the code, the code is an addition to the prose.
The problem is none of us are, maybe you are, I'm not Knuth, it's hard
I'm not Knuth, no, I would not even pretend to be.
But that's beautiful stuff. That I remember reading that, being blown away at how cool that was. Well, so I agree with you on the reading. Yeah,
and what I liked, at that time I was trying to study how things worked and look for security vulnerabilities, because that's what I was most interested in, but as a byproduct, I saw how a lot of software was written, because you're trying to understand it, and there was open source code. There was actually around that same time I got a source code license to Solaris. It's like Sun had their first source code. You could mail in, pay $50 and get a source code CD, and so I still have it. So for Solaris 8, and it was fascinating. I was just like, wow, I read source code to Linux and FreeBSD, but this was like the real commercial Unix. I wanted to see how it was different, and some code was better, some was worse. But it was interesting seeing how things were put together. After the pen testing, what'd you do? When I first moved to New York in kind of 2003, that was when I started my first kind of commercial penetration testing. That was at a company called At Stake. They were eventually acquired by Symantec, and they were kind of, the Loft went there, fairly well-known company. Also, At Stake was well-known too? Yeah, very well-known. That was also a tremendous place to learn. I actually, ironically, learned more from the mailing lists that were there than people that I learned a lot from people I worked with, but I joined after the company had been around for like maybe 6 or 7 years, but they had a mailing list history of some of the greatest minds in our industry, and it was fascinating just going through. I just read all of it, and you could learn a lot there, and I also worked a lot of smart people there, and got to do a lot of fun engagements where I got to learn a lot as well. So a lot of sort of living on the edge of kind of offense, defense in your career. That's been something you've been good at. Yeah, I see them as two sides of the same coin. I think it's interesting where some people focus a lot on one versus the other, but I think you can't understand one without the other. And throughout my career, I've always gone from one to the other because, you can apply insights from either. So after At Stake, where I was doing a lot of penetration testing, I went to Bloomberg. And worked on the security team there and learned firsthand how hard it was to enact some of the recommendations I had as a consultant. Because when you're doing a penetration test, you'll look at something like, oh, you have a vulnerability here. You should just not have that. Well, it turns out sometimes it's more challenging because to take that system down to apply a patch, you have to have a redundant system. Maybe you don't have a redundant system. And you learn a lot kind of being on the opposite side. Glad you said that. Well, auditors and regulators should have to do that too. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's easy enough to stand there and say, hey, list these 5 different points. But you're right. When you're on the other side of that, I've spent my whole career on that side trying to do defense. There's a million reasons why that sometimes can't happen, including dopey things like we don't have enough money or the right people. Right. Those aren't even technical reasons.
Exactly.
Right. So it's much more challenging. Hey, let's pedal forward.
Sure.
Capsule8.
So Capsule8 is my latest venture. Co-founded it with John Vega, Brandon Edwards, Pete Markowski.
Smart guys.
All
pretty
very
good
smart.
Group.
Yeah. I call it that we have an irresponsible amount of security expertise in the company. Because right now we look everywhere and there's not enough security expertise to go around, and we're just hogging it. But I think we're going to put it to good use.
That's good. So tell the company, I think of it in terms of securing Linux, securing containers.
Yep.
When you meet with somebody, what's the elevator speech around the company?
So the elevator pitch is real-time attack disruption for cloud-native environments. So there's a lot of jargon packed in there, so I can kind of go through and unpack it.
Yeah, especially when I hear the word disruption, because I bet that was selected very carefully.
Yes, that was not an accident.
Yes.
So we call it disruption because it is actively fighting back in the attack. Some people call this active defense, but we think the word active defense has sort of had its meaning clouded by some people meaning it to be an active attack against your attackers, versus what we consider it to be is just not being passive when an attack happens. So our system responds to attacks, contains attacks, and it is all done in real time. So instead of just detecting an attack and raising the alert for a human analyst, we try to make the human's role be refinement rather than speed critical response. Because even if you look at how a lot of people approach security, they'll do a batch analysis of security events, through a SIM or they're kind of log chipping or some other in-house architecture. And in a production, that might be okay for a desktop environment where you might feel comfortable letting an attacker dwell for 30 days before you evict them. In a production environment, that is way too long. 24 hours is too long because of the speed at which they can identify kind of the volumes of data that they're looking for, and the speed at which they can get it out. So our system is focused on fighting back in real time, and with a strong emphasis on cloud-native environments. So that's.
Can I keep you on the fighting back for a minute?
Of course.
So most people watching would think of fighting back as an old IP shun or something, which is kind of dumb.
Yeah.
Or maybe using a little deception. Or throwing a new rule up. Give me in simple terms, what's the heuristic? What sort of things are you doing? What's the strategy?
Yeah, so the strategies are oriented around the new growth of stateless architectures. So one of the side effects of movement to the cloud, where workloads or where systems are designed to scale up and scale down with the workload, is a lot of the tiers are
scaling up via virtualization and spinning new capabilities,
creating new containers on demand, new cloud instances on demand. And it'll adapt to the amount of traffic rather than being a static fixed amount. So in order to do that, a lot of your application architecture has to be stateless. And so not completely stateless, you still have stuff in RAM, you still have a data store, but what it means is that your data store is stateful, but every other component you try and make stateless. And those stateless components are the application logic, the web servers, application servers, and those are typically where vulnerabilities are found and exploited. So what we take advantage of is the fact that those can be restarted very cleanly without those stateless components, with a low impact to the workload. And so this gives us an opportunity to just use that, so that if we see a kind of a compromised container, we know that there's a known good to restore it from, and we can restore that. And we can give the human analyst the kind of forensic trail on what happened, so they can refine the system saying, keep doing this or don't keep doing this in this instance. And we can have the system learn when it should do it, when it shouldn't. But a lot of the security logic at this stage of our development is focused on expert-driven rules. So we have some innovative sort of data modeling and kind of approach and analytical approaches that we're applying with our expert knowledge in security to know these are the chokeholds or the choke points for attacks, rather than look for the 10,000, 100,000 possible vulnerabilities, or the 1,000 that might be exploited in the wild, or the 100 that might be exploited in the wild at the time. We look for the much smaller number of strategies and tactics that attackers use in a real attack. So if the vulnerability is a 6-month-old vulnerability, if it is a 0-day, it doesn't actually matter to us. Because what we're seeing is that in order to exploit any of the universe of vulnerabilities of a particular class, there's a very small number of approaches that someone's going to use to exploit that. So we focus on detecting those. And the metaphor I like to use for this is the breaking of the glass. So I don't need to know every type of bullet in the universe or every type of rock in the universe. If all I want to know is that when this glass is broken, we drop down the guardrails or whatever.
Is a distributed app on a bunch of containers inherently more secure than the way we used to do it, like an app on an OS and so on? Are containers a good thing from a security perspective in your mind?
I think
that's the new platform.
Yeah, it's the new platform. It's the new virtualization.
Yeah.
I really think they are.
They're better.
Yeah. So it's hard to compare apples and oranges for the isolation between virtualization and containerization, because what containerization really is in its current form is application level virtualization. So we, instead of kind of having multiple tenants of the same operating system, we just abstract away the OS from the bits of the application and its libraries that it requires. And so for our data analysis, it's easier for us to know when something is awry in that application than a large VM with a lot of things going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, what's the role of automation in all of this thing? I'm assuming, and you'll have to tell me,
sure,
that the security mechanisms that you guys have built is probably tangled in with a lot of the automation around the Linux orchestration of all the containers and so on. Help me with that. Automation, I assume, is absolutely essential.
Absolutely.
To running something like this properly, right?
Well, it's absolutely essential to just modern infrastructure, because what we've seen is that there's not enough security expertise to go around, and so people are looking to automate their operations anywhere that's possible. And what that lets you do is, with the staff that you have, just have a much larger impact of data that you can analyze, or customers that you can serve with the same amount of resources, because the bounded resource is our human time. And so orchestration is what it's enabling is this app store for the cloud, because people talk a lot about containers, but I think that is just one part of the story. And the metaphor I use for this is mass production in the assembly line. So if we look back 70, 80 plus years, we could say, the assembly line, it's a conveyor belt, right? It's all about a conveyor belt. And the conveyor belt and the automatic movement of the thing that you're through the factory, the thing you're making through the factory, is an important piece of it. But you don't have the whole picture unless you have, fixed repetitive actions done by one person that is stationary, and you move the object to them. And then what that does is that means that the factory worker, they are, multiple people can do the same thing, so that it's redundant, and that you get this tenfold increase in throughput of your factory. And this was revolutionary. This was a big deal. And one of the things that modern infrastructure does is that same thing, but for sort of electronic workloads. If you look at the scale of which, Google and Facebook and Amazon are able to operate with the staff that they have, that 10x or more growth in efficiency is what everyone really wants. And containers are a piece of that story. So with containers, continuous integration, continuous deployment, orchestration, and agile development, all these tied together, you get that 10x increase. And that's what people really want. And that is a huge benefit for security. And some of the reasons are a little subtle. For instance, everything is more fluid because it is recreating itself. And so it becomes much easier to patch a vulnerability in a system that is used to deploying to production 100 times a day, or is built for deploying to production 100 times a day, than it is patching a vulnerability in a system and an architecture that is designed to set it and forget it. Yeah, and most of the way we build, internet infrastructure up to this point has been designed for set it and forget it, even to the words of uptime. We brag about, that system's been up for so long. That means it hasn't been patched in that long. What you really care about is reverse uptime. You really want to brag about how your systems are reinitialized of everything stateful. down to the firmware, and measure that in hours. And that's what leading cloud providers do. And then as you build, up that chain, you have a much more secure infrastructure.
Let's talk about the company. So,
Sure.
Guys have been in business a year or so?
Yeah, we're almost at a year.
Interesting. Yeah. And are you seeing service, products, toolkit? What do you think you'll be selling? Because everybody's running Linux in data centers. There's a lot of potential,
and even more in the
customer,
cloud.
Opportunities there. But what do you see? You building a product?
It's a product. It's always we've always known that it's going to be a product. It's not going to be a service, and it's going to run in our customer's environment. Mm-hmm. And that environment can be their cloud, can be their on-premises data center behind the firewall, but it's designed for operation disconnected from us, because this is the security of people's production environments. So their most important data is there, so they're extra sensitive, and this is what we've heard from people we've talked to. There's extra sensitivities there about what access they're giving, and so they don't want to send all that data to a third party. And so we designed for that, and it's designed for large-scale deployments down to small-scale deployments.
I've heard you guys mention stats about Linux penetration, say in the data center and in the cloud. It's real high numbers, right?
Yeah,
I don't remember whether 80 something.
It was actually really surprising to us that we found out that over 90% of instances in Amazon are running Linux.
90%. Right?
Yeah, and as of a couple years ago, over like a third in even Microsoft Azure are running Linux. And so across the board, what we're seeing is roughly 80% of cloud instances across all the major cloud providers are running Linux. And it's interesting that it's a piece of the stack that people they say, oh, we don't really need something for Linux security, but it's evident that it is a key component in all of their infrastructure, and all their infrastructure is built on top of it.
What do people do to protect Linux now, other than maybe running a scan or something? Or is that it?
That's just not a lot. I mean, a lot of, actually we've seen the most of is a lot of people building their own solutions. So if you look across, especially high-tech companies, Silicon Valley, like a lot of them build their own intrusion detection response tools and capabilities
using Snort or something like that, or
it's a mix of open source components and kind of internal infrastructure. I don't want to name anything specific.
Well, I mean, Linux admins tend to be very technical. I mean, I bet a lot of people watching, attracted to me interviewing you, are probably Linux geeks who probably enjoy doing it too much. Do you give some flexibility in the tool to let them continue to have some fun?
Oh yeah, no. Well, our system is designed for very flexible deployment, because we think of it as a toolkit more than a one-size-fits-all solution. Because how I see people's production environments is they're like cities. So every human city is the same and different in various ways, and people's production environments are basically the same thing. They have freeways, they have buildings, but everything has a different character, and so our system is built to learn that character, learn that lay of the land, rather than dictate a particular way of building your system. Because what we've also found with people's priorities for production environments is the first is stability, the second is performance, and security is usually third. For some people, security is like 10th, but we want the best places have it in the top 3.
One of our favorite questions to ask people, kind of as we close interviews, is about kind of what's coming, and maybe from a threat perspective. I'd love to hear what you think. Like, there's a lot of hyperbole about, the power's going to go out and all these horrible things, and you and I both know there's not zero chance of that.
Non-zero chance.
But what do you think? Like, if you're at a cocktail party and somebody finds out, about what you do for a living, and they come over and say, hey, Dino, and then insert name of really bad thing, what do you usually tell them?
A lot of things. I usually start by saying it's usually the thing that we're not paying attention to, because what attackers always do is they look for the weak points, and anything that we are paying attention to and talking about, most often we have good enough defenses there, or there's some other mechanisms that make that harder to do. So some of the things that protect a lot of our critical infrastructure is its diversity. That basically a lot of the systems are different. There's not a lot of homogeneity there. Makes it a lot of human effort to develop attacks for. And what some things that are weaker than we thought are what actually end up getting attacked. And what I'm actually keeping my eye out for is what I call the the app store for the data center. Because what a lot of these orchestration platforms are building to is the ability to have an app store to install complicated infrastructure like Kafka, Cassandra, right into your cloud or right into your data center. And a lot of the cloud providers are pushing this because it makes it very easy for them to sell more instances in more time. And what that's going to do is create something like, and I think Kubernetes is the orchestrator that's going to really enable this. Something like Android for the cloud. People will move towards having very roughly similar infrastructure and different providers that provide like a Kubernetes distribution in one or more public clouds, but a lot of common apps installed across them. And in that world, you need something that, because there's not like a central app store, like Google's App Store and Google Play services provide a lot of common security malware scanning and other things for people's mobile devices. I don't think that same model will work for corporate, production environments. And so they will need
Apple.
Or Apple, yeah, for highly privacy-sensitive companies. So there will need to be solutions that are designed to protect that future world and that world that we're getting closer to rapidly. Like even in the last year of this company, it's been remarkable how I've seen the growth of Kubernetes, and now all 6 major clouds have native Kubernetes offerings. And it's quiet, but I see the things moving there, and that's the world that we're building a solution for.
So that we did tape record what you just said,
yeah.
But I got to ask you again. Now
Sure,
I'll ask
yeah.
you more deliberately.
Yeah.
Do you think what are the chances of the power going out in a major city as a result of a cyber attack? High, medium, or low? What do you think? Like in the next 5 years?
Next 5 years, medium.
That's what I would say too.
My personal gut.
I'd put it there. Good middle of the road answer, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But
middle of the road.
It's true. I mean, there's dysfunctionality that plays to our advantage, right? Cascading attacks require that things actually work together. Sometimes it's good that elections are like that, right?
Yep. Elections are also very fragile things.
Yeah, it's good that we don't have the ability to cascade and interoperate.
Yeah.
I hope that as that eventually wanes, because eventually everything connects to everything else, one of the great axioms of what we do, it probably gets worse, I would think.
Yeah, well, I think there's always a wave. Like these connections obviously give us great benefit, like in efficiency and communication, but it's not without their risks.
Yeah,
and we're as security professionals, we're always trying to stay ahead of the risks. Like we'll see we're looking for the risks, we're trying to spot them, and I think a lot of our successes are where they're not attacks and may not be viewed as things where we've done enough. But one area related to the risk that I think would be also interesting to watch is for malicious attacks at large scale. I'm not sure how many online environments really do a good job of backups versus cross data center replication, and attacks that just wipe out 12% of the population's bank records, or by just deleting that data. That's terrifying, because that's highly impactful. That's actually the attack that I feel like we're not paying as much attention to, and that's the one that worries me the most.
People would call that destructive malware.
Basically not ransomware, but data destruction in the data center malware.
Yeah. Well, that's a little frightening. So, hey, you guys going to keep the company in Brooklyn?
As long as we can. I'll keep voting. I'll keep pushing for us to keep it there as long as we can.
You guys are one of the coolest companies in Brooklyn. I hope you stay there.
I hope so too.
Love having you here.
Yeah,
I
thank
hope
you.
You come back as you guys start developing some really cool stuff. I know you're doing that already, but maybe come back and we can talk a little bit more about the functionality and just
of course
keep it going.
We'd love to tell you more when we can.
You're awesome for coming.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for the time.
See you again.
Good to see you.
And we'll see you next time.